Today we're covering a 2018 Russian dark comedy film called Why Don't You Just Die? The film begins with a guy named Matvey who stands before a door and reluctantly places his finger on the doorbell. Afterward, he prepares himself and motivates himself as if he's about to fight someone. While clenching a hammer in his hand, he finally rings the bell. A burly man comes out and asks Matvey his purpose of visit. Just as Matvey is about to answer, the elevator opens up and a vicious dog bursts out of it while being grabbed by a lady. The dog keeps barking as Matvey tells the man that he's Olya's boyfriend. Moreover, he states that Olya wanted both of them to meet each other. The burly man, who is actually Olya's father, lets him in the house and goes to eat his lunch. In the meantime, Matvey locks the door and walks to the living room ready to smash the man's head, but suddenly, Olya's mother emerges from the kitchen. Upon seeing her, Matvey hides the hammer in his jeans and tells his name. In return, Olya's mother introduces herself as Natasha. In the interim, she offers Matvey to come and sit at the table. Just as he tries to sit, the hammer slides out of his jeans and drops on the floor. Olya's father Andrei stares at the hammer and then his eyes turn to Matvey. He asks if he always carries that hammer. Matvey answers that it's for a friend. Andrei takes it as a lame excuse and changes the topic to Olya. Furthermore, he mentions that he's a detective, so he keeps a close eye on his daughter's friends. After that, he asks if Matvey likes to screw Olya. Upon that inappropriate question, Matvey starts to get angry and he fastens his hold around the hammer. Just as the threshold arrives, Natasha enters the scene and asks what the hammer is for. Upon that, Matvey tries to leave but Andrei makes him sit down, while he sends Natasha into the bedroom. As now only two of them are left in the living room, Andrei focuses on a pistol for one moment but then walks into the kitchen to grab some sugar for Matvey's coffee. Behind his back, Matvey tries to escape but Andrei returns with a shotgun and gets him at gunpoint. Suddenly, Natasha peeps through the door which makes Andrei shoot the bullets. Luckily, Matvey dives away and the shotgun blasts a hole in the wall, through which tons of dollar bills fly everywhere in the room. With that, the fight begins as Matvey climbs on Andrei and smashes his head. In response, Andrei uses the television to attack the boy and pin him to the ground. The fight goes on as Matvey keeps getting hit by the TV. At one point, Andrei kicks him so hard that he hits the wall and becomes stuck there. Afterward, Andrei tries to strangle Matvey but gets bitten in the arm. The showdown escalates as Matvey tries to reach for the shotgun but Andrei grabs him and throws him over into the wooden table where he crashes brutally. As he slowly gets up, Andrei throws the television into his face where the screen smashes into his face and the scene fades out. Up next, we see Matvey and Olya together in bed. He tries to make love to her but she refuses. Afterward, both of them are in the kitchen while tea is being prepared on the stove. As they're facing each other, Olya asks him to finish her father off for her. Upon Matvey's inquiry, she reveals that he's been raping her since she was 12 years old. As she sheds tears of grief, Matvey decides to help her. Back to the present, we see Matvey tied up in the bathroom by handcuffs. He tries to get free of the restraints but in vain. Therefore, he climbs on the edges of the bathtub and looks over the door to witness Andrei and Natasha collecting all the scattered money and stashing it in a bag. As Matvey looks at them, Andrei catches him in a flash and enters the bathroom to check on him. Matvey slides back into the bathtub and pretends to be unconscious. As soon as Andrei leaves, he begins his struggle in order to get rid of the handcuffs. His efforts take him to the point where he tries to grab a hairclip fastened on the shelf. Unfortunately, everything falls on the floor. He tries to grab one hairpin which drops dramatically into the bathtub and gets stuck in the drain hole. With extreme struggle and utmost effort, Matvey uses his tongue to fish out the hairpin from the filthy drain hole. After finally retrieving it, he uses the hairpin to open the handcuffs. In the meantime, a video plays on the screen where a man explains the mechanism of how a hairpin can open the handcuffs. Therefore, Matvey uses the mechanism to open the handcuffs while breaking the door of the bathroom. He then escapes out of the apartment beaming in happiness. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. The handcuffed man then explains that now, the imported handcuffs use a double lock mechanism and it cannot be picked. Therefore, we see that no matter how hard Matvey tries, he can't get rid of the restraints. Just then, Andrei enters the bathroom and knocks Matvey out. Afterward, he tries to inquire about Matvey's purpose of visit. Matvey doesn't answer him and instead, spits on his face which enrages Andrei to such an extent that he walks away and comes back with a drill. He then inflicts utmost brutality on Matvey by drilling in his leg and questioning him about his purposes of visit. After finishing up with him, Andrei comes back into the living room with a bloodied shirt. Natasha asks if he finishes Matvey off, upon which Andrei shakes his head in denial. Continuing the conversation, he states that Matvey blames him for touching Olya. He then gets up in exasperation while Natasha advises him to let Matvey go. As he refuses, Natasha puts up another idea to call the detectives and Andrei agrees to call his friend Evgenich. On the other hand, Matvey wakes up in the bathtub covered in blood. Gradually, he gets up and struggles to get free. As there's no other solution, he brutally breaks his own thumb to slide his hand out of the cuff. Slowly, he limps out of the bathroom and picks up the shotgun. He then comes face to face with Andrei in the living room. He lifts up the shotgun and points it at Andrei, but Natasha shields him. There, Andrei clarifies himself and states that he didn't touch Olya and nothing like that happened. In order to further testify, Matvey asks to call Olya. Natasha brings the phone and as Olya receives the call, the world breaks down on Matvey as she simply refuses to even know Matvey. Andrei listens as Olya denies the knowledge of a friend named Matvey and as he ends the call, Matvey drops the gun. Andrei approaches him, hits him in the stomach, and takes his life eventually. As Natasha breaks down in fear, the doorbell rings and Andrei finds out that Evgenich is outside. The story flashes back into the past where we see Evgenich and Andrei together at a crime scene. Evgenich ends the call with his wife and observes the heinous crime scene where a rich bloke has brutally chopped a girl. As the officers take away the culprit, Evgenich decides to take some money out of the criminal case. He talks with Andrei and states that he needs a fortune for his wife, Klava's surgery. Therefore, they can grab the money from the rich kid and let him free. In order to carry it out, both of the detectives talk to the rich parents and bribe them for the money. The father drops the bag of cash at the lockers and the young criminal goes free as easily as that. Up next, we see Evgenich and Andrei in the car ready to receive the money. Evgenich starts crying as he states that this money is their last hope for Klava's survival. Andrei consoles him and gets out to grab the money. As soon as he takes the bag out of the locker, his mind turns evil and he decides to keep the cash to himself only. So, he returns and lies to Evgenich that the locker is empty. Fury boils in Evgenich's mind and later on, he stands in the pouring rain while holding a picture of his dead wife. He then seeks revenge from the young guy by chasing him in the middle of the night and beating him up savagely. Back to the present, we see Evgenich observing Matvey. He states that what Andrei did is too extreme. He sends Natasha to make some tea. Meanwhile, he asks Andrei to help him get Matvey to the bathroom. Upon that, Andrei offers to call Olya and by her reaction, they'll judge if she knows Matvey or not. Evgenich agrees and Andrei returns after a while, stating that Olya will be here soon. After that, they pick up Matvey but Evgenich accidentally drops him to the floor. Just as his head hits the ground, Matvey wakes up with a jolt and the film flips back to the 2000s where Matvey also gets knocked out when he is a kid. His friends stopped his heartbeat accidentally and when he got dropped to the floor, the hit woke him up again. While as a kid, his heart stopped for 12 minutes. As an adult, his heart stopped for 17 minutes. As soon as Matvey gets up, Andrei knocks him out again by a punch. As he's still breathing, Evgenich offers him water to drink. Andrei gets angry at that hospitality and Matvey suddenly mentions the money. Evgenich gets alert and tries to inquire about the money. Matvey asks him to check the cupboard and as soon as Evgenich discovers the bag, Natasha drops to the floor in dismay. Evgenich comes face to face with Andrei and confronts him about the money. Andrei becomes blunt and clearly states that he liberated Evgenich from all the trouble and that now half of that money is his. Evgenich refuses to accept any reason as the money could have saved his wife. Therefore, in order to avenge her death, he pulls out his gun. In return, Andrei also grabs his shotgun and they both are on the verge of pulling the triggers when suddenly the door opens and Olya enters the scene. The movie comes to a standstill for a moment but instantly, both the men shoot each other. The shotgun round throws Evgenich off his feet into the walls while Andrei stands his ground. Olya runs forward and hugs Natasha. Meanwhile, to everyone's sheer astonishment, Evgenich starts moving and gets up. Despite being shot in the stomach, he struggles to get up and take out Klava's picture from his pocket. He mentions that he saw her in a dream and amidst the small moments of temporary pleasure, he drops to his death while everyone else watches silently. The story of Olya then starts as she's part of a theater play. After she gets free, she goes to her job at the store where the manager, Oleg, fires her for being late. She apologizes to him and pleads with him to let her keep the job. After some talk, he agrees to keep her if she gives him a handjob. As a response, she leaves the room while shaking her hand after punching Oleg in the face. Later that night, she watches Andrei return with the bag of cash. At the dinner table, she asks her father for some money but he refuses. She then observes Andrei carefully taking away the bag so she follows him and peeps over the door to watch him crying with the bag full of money. Back to the present, Andrei confronts Olya and she accepts that she knows Matvey. Moreover, she reveals that her father didn't assault her and she only did it for the money, upon which Matvey stares at her in complete astonishment. As they are arguing, Natasha asks Andrei to make some tea, while she walks away into her room hesitantly. In the interim, Andrei takes out some cash and hands it over to Olya. He advises her to keep it discreet and discusses Matvey's aftermath, upon which Olya accepts to let him die. Andrei then asks Olya to check on Natasha, but as soon as she goes to the room, a tragedy hits the family. Natasha hangs herself from the chandelier, and as Andrei cuts off her strap, she hits her head hard on the table edge and dies. Utterly grieved, Olya looks at her father, who's also in shock. Just in that moment, the doorbell rings and Andrei drags Matvey away. As he's being taken away, Olya grabs a knife and plunges it into Matvey's body. Amidst the muffled screams, Matvey goes limp. Meanwhile, the doorbell keeps ringing and there are 2 officers outside. Olya cleans herself and changes her clothes to answer the door. The officers inquire about the noise complaint from the neighbors. She puts up a lie that it might be the television, and upon that, she further insists that she's alone. The officers ask for her identification, and as they get to know that she's Andrei's daughter, they both become lenient and let her be. Back at the living room, the father and daughter decide to put up a story linking Evgenich's death and Matvey, including Natasha as a victim of crossfire. Afterward, both of them sit together to eat at the table, where Andrei calls Olya dumb since childhood and states that he's amazed that she didn't get clever with the passage of time. Later on, he drags Natasha into the living room and puts her up against the shelf. After getting the scene ready, he throws alcohol all over the dead bodies to wipe the fingerprints. As he pours it on Matvey, he wakes up from his unconsciousness. Andrei stares at him in confusion as to how Matvey is still alive. Suddenly, a shotgun bursts through the room and throws Andrei in the wall. It is then revealed that Olya shot him. She cleans the gun and grabs the money, ready to get out of the apartment. She apologizes to Matvey, but suddenly, a bullet pierces through her neck and she drops to the floor. It turns out that Andrei has fired the bullet. Both of them then bleed to death and Matvey gets up beside Olya. As she's dying, she apologizes to Matvey again and goes lifeless. Following her death, Matvey slowly gets up and limps away. Gradually, he gets out of the massacre and staggers to safety, and that puts an end to the film. Thanks for watching, guys.